At the start, good, recording in progress, press that, say you've got it. At the start, what I think I'd like to hear from you is all of your different societies. And so give maybe a minute or two perceptions as to how publications are evaluated and how much you've got to follow the Anglo-American core and how much your own local publications are evaluated. So I guess I'm going to start from the very top here, just in the order of people I have here. Ricardo, you're the first name I see here. Speak up. How does it work in Mexico?
What? Me? Oh, okay. Well, I was waiting for Fernando, don't know where he is. So very quickly, well, it's the same as everyone else. No, we have this citation publications indexes. But the problem here is not the indexing issue, it's the ranking issue that works in different ways from different disciplines, especially because most of the rankings are seeing how, for example, natural sciences, biology or physics are working on how do we cite. No, so the problem is not, well, the problem is ranking and taking it as a political tool, no, because obviously someone has to do the indexing. But that's how it works.
Immediate question, Ricardo. Do anthropologists do the ranking or does somebody else do the ranking?
No, the ranking comes from different places. Let's say, and this is probably for most of Latin America, especially Chile, for example, that you have a Scopus ranking. No? So Scopus is a company that takes different ways of measuring, citations. So the problem is not that they are measuring, the problem is that they don't have the whole information, and that is a problem of publications.
Okay, and then what about language? What's the rating given to Spanish language publications as opposed to English language publications?
Well, here everything's in Spanish, so there's no problem.
Okay.
Now, probably the problem will be the rotation in editorial committees or scientific committees. But for example, as a difference from Brazil, the open access boom happened mildly, but not a citation boom. That's different. Those things should go hand in hand, but here it didn't happen.
Yeah. Okay, any more questions for Ricardo? If I were to speak to Mexican anthropologists, to a group of 20 Mexican anthropologists, and ask them, what's the biggest problem you have in terms of how your publications are rated, in terms of your future promotion, what would they probably tell me?
Well, they'd probably tell you that the problem is that you have the general government agency that asks you, like, what's your age index, for example? And, they say, like, well, you try to figure it out. The thing is, and this works for everyone around the world, is that if you don't have a strong citation program, you won't show up in Google Scholar, for example. So that's pretty easy. If you don't have an agency who's working to make visible and discoverable your work, then all these tools that we have around, including the open access directory that exists, you will not show up. No, this is not some sort of magic, but the federal agencies here in Mexico think that it's magic. So they ask you for an index and you have to figure it out. Now, you can work out the different ways of how to increase your citation index or your visibility, but that is at a personal, individual level and takes time, of course, and a little work. But yeah, it's possible. Yeah. And that's how they score it. They say, like, just put your index and then your Scopus index, for example, if you have one. So the problem here, and this is what I'm going to end, is the problem here is that most of the time it's subjective, that even if there's a number, there's people who will evaluate your work and say like, oh, well, you wrote 5 books, but the editorial, it's more it's more depending on the other issues rather than an index or index.
Okay, now, Ricardo, this is great, and this is the ongoing problem that we're always going to have, because I know Gang Chen was telling me about how young Chinese anthropologists prefer the objectivity of citation indexes and so on, because nobody can say, I read those 5 books and they're garbage. So it's a loaded issue to bring up. And I'll turn to you right now, Gangchen. But first, Michelle, thank you for answering the various people on WhatsApp, because a lot of people are writing saying they can't get in. So thanks for dealing with that. I appreciate that. Great. Okay, now we've been in Mexico. What about China?
Okay, China, for a long time, China, most of the universities, public universities, run by the government. So it's kind of set up their own evaluation systems. So it's kind of follow SSCI. So China have a Chinese social science citation index. That's CSSCI. That's one evaluation tool. There's another one that's by another. So there are another 2. One is by Peking University. Another is by Chinese Academy of Science. So there are basically the 3 systems there to evaluate your papers. For anthropologists, most CSSCI, as Chinese Social Science Citation Index, that one, created or set up by Nanjing University. It's still run by Nanjing University. That's a way, pretty much same style like SSCI. So most of the universities accept it. If your paper have been, published in those CSSI index journals, you receive a pretty good score. But in Chinese case, this is the Chinese way, okay? The journals most published in Chinese, so not much language barrier anyway there. But China, a lot of what is called globalization or whatever, westernization. There are a lot of big universities that try to follow American style. So for those big important universities like Tsinghua University, Peking University, those big ones, you can imagine those big universities, top 20 or 100 universities in China, they have their own systems. They pretty much SSCI or SSCI or SCI, those American-based index are much more, valued much more.
Oh, no, wait. So you're telling us that there is the Chinese index for stuff in Chinese, but in fact, you get more prestige from publishing in the American side, American journals than in Chinese journals in Chinese.
Especially if you work for those big universities, they require you to publish papers in those SSCI journals. So
I'm confused, James, because in the West, we always hear about how Xi Jinping, the ruler of China, doesn't want so much Western influence. He wants things to be in China, and yet this is totally contradicting that.
No. So as I said, there's 2 ways. One is to try to place more and more emphasis on CSSCI, the Chinese-based index systems. So they want to play, this is government, they want to play more CSSCI, they want to downplay SSCI or SCI. But however, those big universities, they want to be to enter the top 100 global universities. So they want to compete with Western universities. So but you need your professors to publish in English in those American hegemony journals. So this is different.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Any questions for James from any of you? Okay, good portrayal. We'll come back to all this, but this is all just the opening bell here. Anna, speak up. What society are you from, and speak?
Hi, I'm from the Swedish Anthropological Association. Nice to be here. I would say generally in Sweden, both when it comes to assessing recruitment positions and also research proposals, I would say that people don't really use bibliometrics and citation indexes that much, which many are quite grateful for. It's a more kind of qualitative assessment usually. However, there's definitely the tendency to rank well-known publishers from Anglo-Saxon countries much higher than any local ones. And so that's also what I wanted to just report from both we have one Swedish journal called Kritisk Etnografi, the Swedish Journal of Anthropology. It is in English and it has a global scope, but we also try to look at anthropology and kind of give a counterbalance to the Anglo-Saxon kind of core. But as I'm sure many of the rest of you have problems with, it's difficult to attract, especially junior scholars, to publish because they prefer to do it in the bigger publishing houses, of course, and also some of the more senior scholars kind of reproduce this hierarchy as well. Interestingly, we've heard that some colleagues, for example, in African countries, see that holds this kind of journal in a high reputation because it is international and it's also like true open access. There's no fee for the authors or for the readers. So what I brought with me from my colleagues was that it would be really helpful if the WCAA could have an inclusive list of these kinds of true open access journals. And also there's the Stockholm University Press, which is an open access publication book with a series on anthropology and society, so that at least with time we could get more visibility and hopefully more publications.
Yeah, Anna, that's a great point. And I'm glad to have the very concrete policy proposal that we need to have a list of open access anthropological journals around the world. Terrific. That's going to be some work. We'll need to get somebody to be willing to compile it. And, it's hard to find these from everywhere. But that's a great idea. And if you could send me by email just the list address, I'll begin with the journal you're discussing. That's
Great.
the very first one we'll mention. But great. That's a great idea. Yeah.
Thanks.
Terrific. Yeah, great. That's great. And yeah, it's interesting. Some people would consider Sweden to be part of Anglo-American hegemony, but I see from a Swedish point of view, not quite. No, you still want to resist it. So
Yes, and just to add, I mean, we've had that discussion increasingly. I think that we realize that there is a difference. I mean, in Scandinavia on the whole, we weren't as directly linked with colonialism, for example, and there's definitely a different sense in how we also relate with the students and so on. So we think that there's more that could be done there. Yeah. But it's,
great.
I mean, it's very, very dominated by Anglo-Saxon and the literature we teach and so on, for sure.
Yeah. Great. Interesting points. Now, Muggsy, you've got to leave in a little while, so I guess you should come next. Speak up. Turn on your microphone. Yeah.
I'll say a little bit. I see Gabby Dlamini is here in place of Obani, so hopefully she and maybe Helen can talk a bit about South Africa as well. Just rephrase your questions, Gordon. What are you wanting?
The question, okay, well, let's see. Who is actually formally the South African delegate? I guess we should go to that first.
Gabby is.
Gabby, we should probably have Gabby speak then again, but you ask a good question about what it is. How publications are ranked in your society in terms of whether local publications count or whether instead you've got to follow an Anglo-American ideal, how these two work together.
Do you want Gabby to respond or should I?
Maybe you speak for 30 seconds and Gabby, if you're here, speak up, add more. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, very briefly then, those 30 seconds. The publications are in part ranked by institution, not nationally, but also, and that's particularly in terms of promotions, recruitment, etc. But also there's a national system where publication is rewarded financially by the National Department of higher education. Small sum goes to each university, or everything that's published in what's included in the list of what's called recognized journals. And many of the Southern African or South African journals are recognized along with the standard Anglo-American set of journals. I think I've used up my 30 seconds.
Yeah, here's a quick question then, Muggsy. For all of you, how many in your societies, in how many of your societies does the author of a journal published, of a piece in a journal published in a top-ranking journal overseas get direct payment, direct subsidy? I know China's like that. How many pay the author directly? In South Africa like that.
Well, it pays the university, which pays sometimes
Okay.
pays the author. And
Okay.
again, it's
So there's
differentiated between universities.
Okay. And I guess the rationale for it is just to try to really push authors to publish overseas. Is that right?
Correct, but also in local journals. So it's mixed. There's a list, and many South African journals are on that list alongside the leading global journals.
Okay, so Muggsy, do you get more money if you publish in a South African journal, or more money if you publish in a top American journal?
Fixed rate per article, no matter where, if it's on the list.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Okay, interesting points. Gabby, do you want to add to that at all, or are you here, Gabby? Okay, yeah, there you are.
Yes, I am. So I think in terms of the actual standing of the journal, we don't, yes, the global north journals tend to have a higher standing in terms of like them being considered more high impact. However, when it comes to local journals, what happens is that government sends out a list of accredited journals, and those accredited journals, like Dia said, are local as well as international journals. So the standing of those journals tends to be the same in terms of how we view them, in terms of the peer review processes and those kinds of things. So what a local journal would have the same standing as an international journal. There are some journals that obviously, like in any scenario, stand over and above other journals, but that's not necessarily always an issue of them being a local versus an overseas journal. I think the main thing though is that those journals do follow the traditional pattern in terms of kinds of expectations of theory that are expected to be in those journals, the kinds of people that are referenced and cited in those journals. So those kinds of things haven't changed. So yes, there's local journals, but the journals themselves in terms of content still continue to reinforce existing colonial practices.
Yeah. And so Gabby, you're bringing in a whole new layer of what we need to look at, the content of articles themselves. But it does strike me as a bit of exemplary practice to have local journals and international journals treated equally. Do you tend to believe that?
No, definitely. I think that in terms of once the journal sits in the accredited list, that's what we tend to accept. Yes, there are journals that as you grow as a scholar, journals that you have looked up to and want to potentially publish in, those sit within every discipline. Some of those are local journals. They do tend to be international journals. So, so that is still something that exists. Historically, they've been local journals are trying to make that sort of jump and create so that it's not so uneven that people only want to publish in international journals. However, there are certain journals that have, I suppose, have established themselves for years and years and years, and people always want to publish in those journals because they carry a certain status in them, but it's not necessarily, it has to be an international journal. Some very local or even regional journals do that quite well. I think the other thing is that our local journals, well, at least as a journal, what it does very well is that it publishes also a lot of student work, and that student work goes through the same peer review process. However, in terms of the feedback or in terms of the ways in which editors view the work, there's always an understanding that when we view and we give feedback, we must always consider that the other person could be a student. And therefore that feedback needs to be given in a manner that is always constructive in the ways we all know we've published and sometimes we've received reviews that have been scathing. So in trying to ensure that not only is the journal legitimized in terms of its accreditation, but there's also a big focus in ensuring that anthropology students are also published in the journal, right?
Yep.
And that
Yep.
comes with a certain responsibility from the editors who have to ensure that the quality stays the same. However, the review process doesn't only factor in or doesn't only favor established researchers, which is quite lovely. And I think that's something that we need to think about when we think about the journals in our discipline.
Okay, well, great. That is true. Now, there's two separate elements to what you've just said. One is the broader exemplary practice of having local and overseas treated on an equal basis. You've also raised, though, some more important elements that have to do with the way a journal itself is run. We could get into those. I think your first point is one that I will most emphasize here, but let's get into those other issues. And when we write this stuff up eventually, I hope you'll bring that to our attention again. Great ideas. Thank you. Anybody else have questions for Gabby? Okay, we'll move next. Sylvia, you're next. Introduce yourself and speak up.
Hi, how are good morning here.
Morning.
I guess it's afternoon and night elsewhere. Well, I'm from Argentina, and in Argentina, all journals, or most of them, belong to public universities, and this is a problem because of funding. And I want to mention the funding because it's also related to ranking of journals, because they're public and there's no funding. A lot of journals can't have or have enormous difficulties of accessing to the OJ system, which is required for indexing, and also to the DOI, the digital object identifier. That's really a very important limitation, because that means that some journals cannot be indexed in the most important indexes. Another element I want to mention very briefly, I'm the editor of a journal called Etnografías Contemporáneas, which means contemporary ethnography, and we just sent it to Scopus, and Scopus rejected it because it said that there were few citations by other international journals, and they said you may consider publishing articles in English. Well, the whole point of the journal is publishing in Spanish and in Portuguese, not in English. In fact, we translate from important people. We publish Marshall Salins, Sherry Ortner, and other people translated into Spanish. So here's a contradiction, that precisely we have a journal in our language, and then Scopus is saying, well, publish more in English and have this. So the pressure of what you mentioned, Gordon, of this Anglo-American model, Anglo-European, is very powerful. And also the style of writing. There's the style of the American article, essay, article, paper, which is, not the way people write in other parts of the world. So that also has an impact. And there's a national system of ranking journals, and then, of course, these other international. So those are some of the shortcomings.
Okay, Sylvia, that was very eloquently put. And I mean, the way you're speaking of a criticism of the citation indexes themselves for what their language they're looking at. I know that for something like SSCI, inclusion is not a matter of language alone. It's a matter only of who cites what. But you have given a much more direct example in terms of Scopus of discrimination. And so we obviously need to address that as well. That's quite key here. What I'd like you to think about, go ahead. Sorry.
No, sorry, one more thing. They also said that you are not international enough. Well, if it's in Spanish and in Portuguese, of course, there's going to be a limitation to what does international mean and what readership one is going to have. So that's what Scopus says.
Yeah. Virginia, I think you had your hand up a second ago, right? Okay, I guess not. But I mean, Virginia needs to address this because, as a former editor of American Anthropologist, she knows a great deal about how this would work, or of the world section of that. So yes, you're quite right. And Sylvia, if you could think of something that WCAA could do. I mean, we're going to have this list of best practices, and clearly what you're saying directly addresses it. So please help us out as we begin to write this stuff up. That's a very pointed example, though, of Anglo-American hegemony, clearly. Yeah. Okay, let's move on, though. Does anybody else want to speak up now?
Yep.
Go
Gordon.
ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, why don't you let
Virginia
me?
and then Mimina. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you called me. I don't know. I think I was just moving. Andrea is including lots of things in the chat because she had to go. But I don't know that this is the time for me to talk about the US. There are various people here, Ed Lebo, Emily Metzner, who else? Let's see, who are in the US. Gordon, you're not in the US, but you are American originally. I don't know what to say other than that I think it's shameful that U.S. anthropology in general, actually not just the journals, but in general, really doesn't much care about anthropology elsewhere. I don't know if Ed or Emily would want to contradict that, but it is true. So your example, Sylvia, is great, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, absolutely. Ed, since you're on the line and you're the former executive director of AA, what can you tell us about that?
So this is Ed. Hi, everybody. I'm not sure what I can add to the conversation at this point. I will point out that Emily is the WCAA delegate from our association. No, aren't you the world seat? I'm sorry. And we also have our publishing director, Melissa Schmidt, is here as well. I think that I really can't speak to the role that bibliometrics play in promotion and tenure decisions, except one has to assume that they're significant. And I know that at least in my time at the AAA, we paid some attention to the journal citation reports, which rank up to maybe 100 journals or so on the basis of an impact factor that was calculated in a number of ways, all based on citations and the sorts of biases that are built into citations that have been mentioned by a number of colleagues here, especially Sylvia, that it becomes a reifying system is built into the system. But we're the hegemon here, and actually my interest would be in listening to other people's suggestions about ways that we can open this up. The one last thing that I will say, and maybe Emily or Melissa, you've got some other things to add to this. Through a collaboration with a number of WCAA member organizations, some years ago, we did create an open access repository that's known as the Open Anthropology Research Repository, which will take materials, anything except an article, a copyrighted article of record. So conference proceedings and galley proofs and conference papers and course syllabi in any language in multiple file formats. And those materials are indexed in the repository and openly accessible to anybody in the world who has an internet account.
Okay, well, that's good. And
so
a rough equivalent of the open access, or a preliminary equivalent of the open access that Latin Americans have been talking about, and that was recommended to have a list of open access journals. That's good to have. Now, we've got
Yeah.
several other people I want to bring in here in just a second, because 1 second, Virginia, Emily needs to speak up. But first, we have comments on some of the earlier commentaries. Helen, you wrote something about South Africa. Do you want to speak up a second?
I just wanted to reiterate the point that Gabby and Muggsy made, because Gordon, you were almost pushing both of them to say that, but aren't they ranked? And they're not ranked. As long as they sit on this government accredited list, we receive equal recognition, equal subsidies back to the authors. I mean, they go to the universities and the universities decide how they distribute the money, whether it goes to the scholar or it gets absorbed into the university, centralized system. Where it plays out more is probably with promotions. If you want to get promoted at a high level, you're supposed to show that you've been cited internationally and you've been published in all the international journals. So although we have this accredited list where the rankings are equal, what happens in practice, when you've got a promotion subcommittee looking at your CV and all your stats and stuff, that's where it has an impact. But, in South Africa, scholars have quite an active political agenda. Like for myself, I like to publish one local, one international. Even though I know my local one won't get cited as much, it feels incredibly important to publish in local journals. So, I know this gets away from citations, but yeah, I guess it speaks more to rankings and how they play out in effect.
Yeah, well, and Helen, you make a great point. And this is true, for example, even in a place like Hong Kong, where I'm from. I had a meeting with the dean a couple of months ago about my own retirement. And he was saying, yeah, Gordon, you're publishing a lot. But last year, one of your publications was in a journal that came out of Serbia, another in a journal that came out of Brazil. I mean, why should we count those? I'm hearing that directly in Hong Kong, not even American hegemony. That's what we see. Now, Virginia has a question to bring up. And Carmen, you're going to speak about Brazil in a second, because we've got all of Andrea's earlier comments that are great. But first, Virginia and Jaime, speak up, Virginia.
Right. Yes. Am I still, let's see. Okay. Can I? Yeah. I guess I wanted to make 2 points. I'm not sure that they necessarily respond to citations, but I did want to say, one of the things that I guess I'm concerned about is who is sending manuscripts where. I doubt very much that a whole lot of people, anthropologists in the US, actually send their manuscripts to journals outside the US, except for possibly England and Australia. But, we're talking about local and national. But I guess I also want us to think about which manuscripts are being considered where and who those authors are. The other thing I guess I wanted to say is that there is a ranking, sort of an informal ranking, but a widespread ranking anthropology journals that in the US that really have, they come into play when someone is being hired or promoted. And that is to say, has this person actually published in one of the really highest prestigious journals? And most of those are actually AAA journals, American Anthropological Association journals, but not all. Current Anthropology is not owned by the AAA, and it is one of those. But it's American Anthropologists, Cultural Anthropologists, American Ethnologists. If you're a medical anthropologist, it's Medical Anthropology Quarterly, and Current Anthropology. Publication in the JRAI, formerly known as MAN, which is in England, counts as well, but notice we're really talking about US journals plus. But my original point, I think, is a very important point, is that people outside the U.S. may want to publish in the U.S. journals, but most anthropologists in the U.S. don't even consider publishing outside the U.S. Maybe
Absolutely.
for
Yeah,
right?
that's absolutely the case. And so it's a problem not only of publishers themselves, but of a general attitude. And I want to comment on, Mimina, you've been waiting a long time too. I know that, sorry. But I want to comment on this because it's so clear that in American Anthropological Association, the top people have been very open to internationalization, but the great body of American anthropologists don't really care. We put on a panel on world anthropologies and 6 people show up. So that's what we tend to get. Often at AA. Yeah, so, Jaime, speak up. Jamie, speak up.
Jamie.
Jamie, sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
No,
Yeah.
It is Jamie. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm on my iPad. Okay. Yeah, just I mean, there's several things bubbling here in the conversation at once, and I think we probably should kind of separate them out. I mean, one is
Now, Jamie, where are
about
you from?
promotion.
Speak up. What country are you
Sorry,
representing?
I am based in Ireland. I've been based in Ireland for pretty much all my career, but I'm trained in America.
Which is why I misspoke your name. Sorry. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. That's no problem. I grew up in Southern California, and I had a lot of I had a lot of friends that I was Jaime to, so it's all right. But I mean, there's one big set of questions about promotions and how journals are ranked formally and informally. And some places have national structures. Ireland would have very much a, institution by institution structure. My own, the institutions themselves tend to change dramatically from promotion cycle to promotion cycle on these things. So they're very challenging to pin down. The other questions that we're asking are having to do with language. And there are, there's that question of, let's say, Spanish and even Portuguese, which are, highly international, regional, even world languages to some extent. And then you have, what's called in Europe minority languages. So, for example, the Irish Journal of Anthropology will publish articles in Irish. And, so that's another set of questions that in those linguistic structures, anthropology tends to be quite marginalized. They tend to be dominated by folklore and history in particular. So if you're an anthropologist publishing in about a place in a minority language, you're often kind of edged out of the places that are, where most of the scholars in that language would actually read. And then it seems to be the final thing about, how many journals actually exist. So there is an Irish Journal of Anthropology. It did not do well during COVID. And, it's being kind of resurrected now. Our experience actually has been that, American scholars are willing enough to publish, pieces within it. We're probably broadly in an Anglo-American clade, and where scholars in Ireland publish their work, at least anthropologists, it tends to vary quite a bit about where that work is. So, for example, in my own career, a lot of my work in Africa, I have published in African journals, even though my own institution really doesn't have a particular optic to say that's a good thing or a bad thing. It just seemed to make sense for the kinds, especially the work I was doing in South Africa. So I think we just, I think we need to keep these lanes a little bit separate, with regard to publishing, promotion, and some of the complexities around language. I just wanted to jump in because I'm running out of time. I'm missing a talk I was supposed to be at, so I'm going to have to sign off in the next few minutes.
Okay, and fair enough, Jamie, but you did make one element here that I wish you had spoken up for. You brought up Spanish and Portuguese, but some of the biggest anthropological languages are indeed Japanese and Chinese. And
Absolutely.
so the idea of making Spanish and Portuguese speak up, there is that counterweight. And I want to bring in Junji here in just a second. First of all, though, we do have a waiting list of people here. 2 people have their hands up. Mimina, I'm going to let you go first because you've been waiting for half an hour now. Then Otto, speak up. And then Carmen, too, you've been waiting. Mimina, speak up.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really a huge issue. Sorry, I'm speaking from the Greek Association from Athens in Greece. Well, it's a big issue actually, and I have to say that it's really interesting how we share our experience here. And sometimes, even though there are bigger societies or smaller societies, there are common problems here. Well, in Greece, we have another conflict issue. Actually, there are some very few money for funding for open access journals in Greek, which is something that we try, especially in anthropological society here. We work hard to have our first journal in anthropology in Greek. And we believe that this is going to give the floor and to open our voice to our community here. But on the other hand, as you all before me highlighted, the rule is in English. English papers in high-rated journals. Think that there is no original ranking. I mean, we do write in English also in Greek journals or in Balkan journals. I heard about Gordon and Serbia, and there is a big production of very good papers in the extended Balkan area and also in South Europe, from what I know. We, as a Greek association, we're trying to make a network in between the Balkan societies and South European societies to highlight these problems. But the thing, the big bang here in Greece is that the higher committee that evaluates the university work, the academic work, imposed Scopus and Web of Science for everybody, just like that, without asking, without discussing, without seeing how things going to other disciplines than medicine, biology, etc. And you know how it is. There is a very nice company of 10 people that write the same almost research. They are working the same research. Okay, I don't want to evaluate, but it's so much different for us. And the thing is that if you want to address the academy in Greece, you have to be in English, you have to be in American big journals, etc., as we have already said. So the one thing is that the national committee here gives some money for Greek language to write in Greek, but nobody cares about writing in Greek. While here in Greece, everybody teaches and give lectures in Greek. Okay, and this is a problem because actually who we want, for whom we are writing. I mean, what kind of people want to read what we are writing? Who is interested in our researches? And think about us, especially anthropologists, we work in small places, bringing up big issues, and we have to address them everywhere. Of course, I have to say that English, it's a common place for us to work together. I mean, the thing is not that the language, in my point of view, the problem is how we work with this, how make different hierarchies and how discriminate people outside generally. So in Greece, the problem is that nobody formally and in the hardcore, nobody cares about what is going on in social sciences total, not just in anthropology. We try as anthropologists and sociologists to work, and historians to work in new journals in Greek. We try hard to make a status for them, and then nobody cares about it. I mean, and yes, I think this is our association here is a floor to make the discussion, to open this problem to generally, and to see what is happening. Thank you very much.
Excellent points, Mimina, and I've gotten a couple of notes here from you, but one key is that placing a single massive Web of Science or SSCI or something that everybody has to conform to is obviously inappropriate. And then there's another issue that came up when you were speaking, that English is both a global hegemon, but it's also an international language, and they have to be compared. It's a confusing matter. We'll come up with both of these later, but thanks. Those were interesting ideas. Now, before we go on, Otto, I know you've been waiting. So too have you, Dorothy. Right now, Emily did write a brief comment about what's happening in America. Speak up, Emily, if you could.
Sure. I was just adding that the difficulty of the job market in the USA, I think, is a contributing factor to at least junior scholars not looking to publish outside of AAA journals. It's at least, a hindrance to chipping away at the hegemony. And I think that there's a kind of almost a paradox of, or maybe it's what you often see, but that a sort of a hegemonic power is also more provincial, right? So I think that is a major issue in the US as anthropology departments are shutting down left and right, majors are being cut, the adjunctification of the labor force.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right. There are now, by my calculation, more jobs opening up for anthropologists in East Asia than there are in the US and Western Europe. Hands down, that's happening. When is this going to be reflected in publication, though? There's going to be a drag, and that we already see that going on. You may well be right. Good point. Great. Otto, you've been waiting. Speak up.
Thank you very much. Greetings from Central Europe. I hope you hear me, everyone. I am from the Maastricht University Institute of European Ethnology. So I am just no such anthropologists like more ethnologists, and I must say that our situation is maybe similar than in Greece, for example. I want to say that we are funded by published funding mostly, and we adapted the citation indexes. So we have that like Web of Science and Scopus hegemony, and that international publications are absolutely preferred now. We have the system that we gain points from publications, and there is the effort to unify that system from all fields. For example, technology, nature science, and also anthropology, ethnology, history may gain the same criteria. Now, this is slightly different. For example, the money are distributed from the state level to the university, from the university to the faculty, and from the faculty to the department. And now, here in Faculty of Arts, we have like system which prefer humanities, like we only don't gain points from Web of Science or from Scopus, but also from books. But there is effort to unify it and only gain points from the Web of Science and Scopus, and don't evaluate like local journals and books. There is one issue that there is effort to adapt only the citation indexes and don't prefer like local journals. The second issue is that now we gain points from Scopus and Web of Science, and there is effort to only gain points from Web of Science. And also there are really big differences how many points you get. For example, if you publish in Web of Science journal, you have 300 points. But if you publish in the quartile 4 Scopus journal, which is, for example, few Czech journals, you get only 15 points. So it's like the Web of Science is strongly preferred. This is one issue. And if I can, second issue is that, for example, we adapted this like citation indexes. But for example, our like professional field is strongly collaborating, for example, with German-speaking countries, and with history, we are ethnologists, so we are like between history and ethnology and anthropology. And for example, in German-speaking countries, which are important for many colleagues, they didn't adapt it so much that citation indexes. For example, some of my colleagues they will publish in really prestigious German journals, high quality, and they don't gain points for it. So they don't get funding from for the institution, from the publications, because we play the game which our neighbors don't play. And also there are efforts to play the same game as like technology sciences, medicine, biochemists, for example, to all play the same game with no differences, and play game which, for example, our neighbors don't play. So it is I think the main issue which I wanted to share. And also we have this problem with open access, because we are required to publish in open access journals, and it is very expensive, etc. So, but it was mentioned before here. So my main effort is that we play the game, but the neighbors don't, and this is I think one of biggest issues.
Okay, Otto, great points. And one thing I might mention that came up in your conversation is that the constant tendency for science to dictate the terms that anthropology has to follow. That's really key. And Web of Science and so on, we need to keep our independence in that. One thing that I'm worried about is how books don't count so much anymore. It tends to be the journal articles following the sciences. And so that's a great point. We got to mention that coming in. Now, who else? Carmen, you've been waiting. There was some Brazilian comments, and we haven't spoken on that. I know there are about 5 people waiting now, but Carmen, speak up if you could.
No, I'm not waiting. I didn't ask to talk now, but I could complete what Andrea had to say, because Andrea is our delegate here. She's a co-editor of Vibrant, and I think she can speak for Brazil if her connection is better now. Otherwise, I will complete with great pleasure. Andrea?
Andrea, are you there?
You have to open.
She might not be, Carmen. Go ahead. Why don't you say something?
Okay. So in Brazil, we have, Andrea, we have a hierarchy of journals, but it's done locally. Not we also take in account website and scopes, everything, but we have something that I think it's very interesting. I'm going to share with you. It calls Qualis. Qualis. I was in the commission that helped to put it on. Hierarchy. It's a hierarchy of journals in the world, but not only the American journals or the. Here we have American journals. This is the best ones that are qualified. We have American Ethnology, Annual Review of Anthropology, but also Brazilian journals, Cadernos Pagu, from Unicamp, Cultural Anthropology, Critique of Anthropology, Current Anthropology, but also Estudos Feministas from Florianópolis, Etnográfica from Lisbon, Portugal. So every year, every 2 years, Religião e Sociedade, which is Brazilian, all of these are qualified as A1 in the top. Okay, this is Vibrant, it's also here, A1. So each area has their own qualis. And this is important because then we are looking at the journal, if it is international, not if it's not international because it's foreign. There is a difference between being international and being located abroad. We have Brazilian journals who are international, and we have like American journals who are local. So we cannot use this category, and we have to look at the journal and see how international it is. This is what counts for promotion mostly. We have A1, A2, B1, B2, B3, etc. Of course, it's very important to have international journals, journals that circulated in many countries. But it's also important in Brazil to have interiorization. I mean, local journals, journals that speak to local public. Unfortunately, they are not ranked the same. And for promotion in the academic career that someone, Helen, Emily, others are bringing up, they are not considered the same. What do we publish in this journal in terms of language? In this A1, we accept Spanish, Portuguese, English. Normally, we accept other languages. We try to accept Chinese and Turkey. And when Vibrant was first put on, we accept all languages, but it was too complicated. And nobody wrote in this language, so it's not a point. Translation is a big problem. When we want to publish in English, for instance, we have some credit from the federal government to do translations in some journals, the best ones. But it costs a lot. So it is really complicated. But all journals in Brazil are in open access. And yes, we have, we try to have DOI and to be on Scopus. And as Andrea said, most of good journals are in Cielo. Cielo is a platform that we can access very easily and find the best journals in the country. But Gordon, for your question, I think that would be a good practice to explain exactly what open access is, because many people mixed up open access with not good review process, and that's not true. We have open access in Brazil and probably in Argentina too, and we have a very good peer review practice. So this is something that we could do. We could
Okay, now let me interrupt a second, Carmen. You're right, we can do this, but the problem we're going to have is there are open access journals elsewhere that have bad review processes. So we're going to have to make a distinction between what is good and what is bad. We're going to have to do this. But the key element you've just said now to me is the fact that the hierarchy of journals should be done locally as well as internationally. And it seems to me Brazil seems to be exemplary in the same way South Africa has been in providing room for both. Great. And I think you guys in Brazil, as well as in South Africa, provide an example that I think the rest of the world may be able to follow. Maybe I'm being too idealistic here, but I certainly hope so.
Well, another good practice would be decolonize the editorial system, and that's quite difficult. We are trying to do this in our published council in WCAA. But what it means that we have give space for people who were out of this system that was brought out in a certain moment of history by white men from the global north. So.
Okay, and now, Carmen, I'm going to have to be a white man from the global north here and cut you off, only because we got a lot of people waiting. Sorry about that. You're making great points, though, and I really appreciate these. You're right about editorial boards. It's a question, though, of who actually does the reviewing an article. Definitely, when we send these out, put some of these suggestions in. I've written a lot of these down. Now, we're waiting. We've got two people here. Dorothy, you've been waiting a long time, but I want to make sure PJ has a chance to talk, and also Junji. You guys are both essential.
So Francine as well. Francine has been
Francine as well. Sorry, Francine, I missed you. Okay. PJ, though, I'm afraid your internet might go out because I know we've had that happen before with you. Speak up, PJ. Situation in
Thank you for the concern. I think discussing Nigeria poses a peculiar problem. That problem is that unlike what I have heard from a number of our colleagues about how the national policy looks at this, Nigeria doesn't have a national policy that addresses the issue of ranking. And so every university is left to its devices. And speaking from position of my own university, which is the first university in this country to award its own degrees, I would say that they have adopted what I think is too complacent approach to this matter, maybe lazy, because what has happened is that they accepted the international ranking. In this case, those organizations in the English-speaking world, Thomson Reuters, they practically worship that, Schimago and SNP. And so, to be promoted to the 3 highest ranking positions in the academic, namely senior lecturer, reader, and professor, you must have, in this order, for senior lecturer, 1 publication in one of these ranking bodies, journal metric bodies. For reader or associate professor, you must have 2. And for professor, you must have 4. I have been a very vocal critic of this, with particular reference to anthropology, because the first wrong thing about this is that the university adopts a kind of one-size-fits-all for all the disciplines, whether you are in the sciences, in the arts, or in the social sciences. And then we say, anthropology has a very peculiar approach to production of knowledge. So that is number 1. And number 2, you have to make efforts to devise your own ranking system. Nobody seems to be listening to that. The nearest I came to it was in 2016, when somebody called Dr. Ibrahim Assal, who was executive secretary of what we call on continental level, Council for Development of Social Science Research in Africa, told me of an effort to devise a ranking system that will address African needs. Unfortunately, shortly after, he didn't last long in his position as executive secretary. Shortly after that, he's removed. A new man is on the chair now, and that new man doesn't seem to be interested in that. Now, how have some of other universities in Nigeria approached this? I just sent out an assessment for a professorial candidate from another university, incidentally, the very first university in Nigeria, but which began as a campus of University of London. And in their request, they didn't say, take note of this international ranking. What they requested is that the publications must be of very high quality and must impliedly be mixed. Some of them published overseas and some of them published locally. And it makes sense because if you are a professor, of course, you are professing for the entire world. So, and they said further, if by your assessment, this person gets 70 over 100 as a score, you might recommend her for professor. So we have this kind of system where it is the universities that determine. There have been requests sent to me that make the point of the certain percentage of the candidates' publication must be ranked in Thomson Reuters, Schemago, or SNP. So that is the situation with regard to ranking. We do not have open access.
20 more seconds, PJ, because we got a lot of people waiting. Speak up.
Yes. I was just going to say one word about language. Have we lost connection?
No, you're there. You're there. Speak up.
Okay, fine. So just one word about language. We do not have problem of language, which vis-a-vis international publication, and I think it's actually a pity. We should have. But as it turned out, we inherited English, and virtually all journals are in English. So I'm afraid we do not have that sort of problem, but it is worth pushing for, that people should endeavor to at least write in some of our indigenous languages, especially since they are offered for courses, for degrees in our universities. So
okay, great, PJ. That's terrific.
Problem,
now, I'm in a
language, no.
I got to interrupt because we have so many people waiting to talk. But
Yes.
here's 3 takeaways I have
much,
what you just told us. One, how do we explain anthropological difference? Is our discipline, can we say we're different in anthropology from other disciplines? That's very difficult to say when people are ranking us. Secondly, you make a really good point about African needs versus global needs. That's key. And the journal you describe, I mean, that's essential here of how much can you emphasize the regional over the global. And then finally, you mentioned the importance of subjective quality apart from global rankings. Absolutely, but that opens a whole other can of worms because quality itself can't be measured. And one beauty of citation indexes is only that you can measure without ever reading anything and get some objective rank even though it's deeply flawed. So there's a plus and a minus to both ways of doing things. But I see your point exactly. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah.
Okay, now who's waiting? I know you're waiting, Junji, and it's way past your bedtime in Japan. Let's go to Dorothy first, though, because you've had your hand up for half an hour.
Is it Dorothy or Chandana? I don't know.
Thanks for
Who are you? Okay, speak up. Yeah, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Chandana wanted to make a quick comment on what Jamie said, and then I'll add with some comments about Italy.
Thank you. Yeah. So let's have it there. I'm sure they can hear. I just wanted to say that Jamie's right that it's not codified, but being implicit makes it even more insidious, I think. And what happens in the Irish context is that anthropology is a bit different from the other disciplines. In the other disciplines, you know, if it's history or something, there is a whole conversation going on within historians in Ireland. And, you know, people contributing to that are recognized for that contribution. But anthropology, you know, there's just the one department in the Republic of Ireland, and then one in Northern Ireland. We are not considered to have enough of a conversation going. So we are judged, you know, at times of recruitment and promotion by completely, hegemonic kind of standards about our publications with, you know, whether they appear in, you know, highly regarded international journals, i.e. American journals. So just wanted to add that. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is that it may be an issue in many places where anthropology is small. and that there's not a large enough discipline to have created, what has been possible in Brazil and South Africa, for example. But I wanted to hand over to Dorothy, who's also right here and has been waiting to say this.
Thanks. So I'm representing the Italian Society SIAC, and maybe if Francesca Declic, who's with us, will want to add something after my comments. First of all, maybe things don't look so bad in Italy compared to some of the other situations you all have described. We do have recognition that anthropology, along with the humanities, other humanistic type disciplines, shouldn't be considered evaluated in terms of what we call the bibliometric ratings. So the process that we have the National Ministry establishes two lists, one for recognized academic journals, and it's a kind of broad list of what is recognized. And then there's a separate list that recognizes some journals as so-called A-list journals. So that's the big distinction that we have, and the fact that you have journals that are on the A list is important for accessing the job market and promotion, etc. We also have an evaluation procedure that every 5 years is supposed to look into the qualitative aspect, which Gordon has already mentioned is very subjective. But we have that as a separate evaluation process that's supposed to reflect on the university department or institution more broadly, and has an impact on an institutional level. I do want to pick back up something, I believe it was Otto mentioned, that maybe can help us also frame things in a big picture about the focus on journals as opposed to other types of writing, and maybe keep in mind the fate of the monograph in these days, where everybody's emphasizing the journals so much. So yeah, the conversation today is about journals and their evaluation and language and how that plays into it. But I think we should keep the bigger picture of other types of communication in mind, which can also be ethnographic films, for example, for some colleagues, and how those fit into, or graphic novels in some cases, and how that's fitting into the evaluation processes. In terms of language, I think one thing that's very nice is that, the point that Carmen, I believe, already made about what does it mean to be an international journal is an important one, because we have on the so-called A list, we have the local journals are very prominent, and they are recognized as quality journals. Along with some of the big international journals, which are not only the usual suspects from the English-speaking world. We have a lot of the French-speaking journals, Spanish medium journals. I would say not that many from Asian languages, and we have a few from the German-speaking world, but not as many as many of my colleagues in South Tyrol have argued there should be. So there's an openness to different languages, although they do remain European. So there's that level of hegemony. And within our Italian journals, many of them are publishing in multiple languages. And so there is an openness to that. And I think that's really great. I think I've pretty much, one other point that was made much earlier by Anna about the Swedish situation, and saying that we could create some list about who's available and accepting contributions, etc. I would specify what languages are accepted to those journals or book series if we're talking about making some kind of list. That was a small point I wanted to make much earlier on.
Okay,
So-
good points. Thank you, Dorothy. Those are great points. Now, 2 points I take away from both of you. I think it was Chandana who was saying that standards will be very different depending on the size of countries. Absolutely. That's something we've really got to remember, because for Ireland, it'll be quite different from what it might be in Germany or Japan, for example. Simply because there are fewer anthropologists, it's more necessary to follow some larger outside guidelines, which may be a real problem. And then, Dorothy, you just said something essential. Keep the bigger picture of books, films, and so on in mind. My sense is that journals tend to be much more hegemonic because there is this common measure. It's harder to judge a book or a film, but that also leads to a liberation from those citation indexes to the extent that they still count. That's a huge issue, but we'll have to bring that up. That's key. Now, Francine was waiting to talk, and I think Francine's been waiting almost an hour. Everybody, keep your remarks relatively short, because we want to come to some conclusions at the end of this. Francine, are you still there? We may have driven her away by making her wait so
no,
long.
she's here. Francine, unmute yourself. Okay.
And Francesca, too, you got to talk about Italy again, but Francine, you go first.
Okay, there you go.
So thank you. I have problem with the hand system, so sorry for that, working with my phone. I'm coming from Canada and from the French side of Canada, Quebec. So in our country, we have two important reviews in anthropology: Anthropologica, which is the official review of the CASCA, our association, Society for Anthropology, and we have also Anthropologie et Société, which it's a journal who is talking about the Francophone anthropology within Quebec, within Canada, and elsewhere in the world. Those two publications are SSCI Index and Google Scholar and everything. Many other reviews are important, but not as much as those two ones. So I want to stress on that. The evaluation of those journals are done each 2 or 3 years, and the importance of international publication is part of the ranking. Those journals are publishing some people, colleagues from everywhere in the world. But our national publications, even as very important, are not viewed within our university, and especially in Quebec, as much important than are the publications we are doing outside our country, and mainly in English. So publishing in French is a battle for a long, long time, even if the Society for Canadian Anthropology was very kind to affirm the two-language publication, but it's quite complex. I won't go very profoundly in that. I would say that in Anthropologica, it's a bilingual language, but within that journal, very few articles are published each issue in French, and the value of those publications, we can have some question, because why people are not sending any kind of article that much in French, and what is are those articles read by our Anglophone colleagues? I don't know. Come from Canada or from anywhere outside the country. But they are making translations of French articles, sometimes in English. And Anthropologie Société is doing that, a Francophone review, not bilingual, but we are receiving articles from different language, mainly French, Spanish, Portuguese, English, Spanish, Portuguese, and we are translating to English, to French, some of other articles. It's important to say that in our university, we have not a special policy to publish in English. It's a bit, implicit, because when you have some evaluation for different things, promotion, for the different kind of competition, it's quite better to have a lot of publication in English, and especially outside the country. So even if we have not, we are not in the obligation to publish in English, it's quite there. And now I just heard yesterday that in our university, the first Francophone university in North America, with an identity, a strong identity of being Francophone, they are thinking of introducing a kind of policy with the obligation to publish in English to have a better university. So it's quite hard. I do not know exactly about having or not policies of that kind outside Quebec and Laval University, but I know that Université de Montréal, which is another important university in Quebec, they do not, it's the same than in Laval. So in front of that,
okay, 30 more seconds, 30 more seconds, okay.
Yes, so I launched the project Anthropène, which is a dictionary, Francophone dictionary, to have a kind of way to resist in front of the all over in English, and to have other means, alternative means to have kind of publications who are in French, but within a kind of international platform. And we are trying to work with the idea of multilingualism instead of French, English, or that kind of thing. But it's hard. We have experience with the WCAA, and we will have others to try to kind a model. But we have a kind of liberty within that publication. We do not have the same stressful obligation of the journals, but we are within some banks like Google Scholar and SSCI and stuff like that. So we are treated almost like a review and appears in some platforms. That's what I want to say.
Great. Sure,
Okay?
that's fine. Now, what I take several larger messages from what you said. The first one is Canada is an interesting situation because you've got French and English, but what you say, Francine, I hear from many other places as well. For example, in Korea, somebody editing a Korean language journal has a lot of trouble because everybody wants to publish in English. That leads to the second key point you've raised, which is university rankings. They are governing a great deal of this shift to English, and we've got to address that as well. And then finally, you raised a really interesting point about implicit versus explicit criticism. Several of the rest of you brought this up too, that you may have formal guidelines saying, hey, the local and the global, they're equal, but that's not the way it works when it comes to actual publication committees. These are great points. Yeah, great. Now, Junji, I know Diana and Virginia have your hands up, but Junji, it's 12:30 a.m. in Japan, and I don't want to keep Junji up too long. So let Junji go ahead if you can. Speak up, please.
But the time is okay. Well, okay. I have been thinking of this issue of English journals, evaluation and so on. And first, I can say that there's no regularity or no. The situation in Japan is probably very special. And one thing is that, of course, there are English journals which are so influential in anthropological committee. community, but there are many Japanese journals, and they are pretty good, but they are only in Japanese. And of course, we have some Japanese English journals, but well, there's no rule. I mean, there are so many anthropologists in Japan, and they have published a lot of things, but somehow they have been published only in Japanese. I don't think which is good, but somehow it's very strong feature that Japanese anthropology is published in Japanese. And another thing is that journal articles, that kind of international ranking of journals and papers, like Google Scholar, ISSC, and so on, are not so significant in anthropological circle in Japan. I mean, of course, everybody knows about that, but somehow evaluation, as far as the evaluation is concerned, that kind of journals ranking, paper rankings, that's not so important. Of course, everybody is aware that they're good work and others, but somehow there's not indexed. And another thing is that another important that anthropology are together, think together the other fields, other related fields, and they are of course evaluated in a sense, and all the scientific works are evaluated, but maybe basically evaluation is done institutionally. I mean, by universities, mainly in university and institutions. So individual valuation, diversity evaluation is not, well, of course important, but not it's not done so systematically.
Now, let me
yes,
interrupt a second. Okay,
yes,
one last point
yes.
then, go ahead.
Yeah, just think.
Sure.
Right now, anthropologists and others, or other humanistic scientists, I mean, like history, anthropology, literature, and so on, they're working together to think about evaluation. How we can evaluate this kind of work. These are different from scientific fields. I mean, humanities and social sciences are different, and now people are aware that the humanities, anthropology, and so on are different, and we cannot evaluate these fields. So we are right now discussed on
Okay,
that
but
issue.
Junji, Japan is an extraordinary example because all the examples other people have given here are of an excess of desire to rank. You know, SSCI, all this stuff, rank everything. Japan's a place where there might not be enough ranking, curiously, where stuff is so subjective, institution by institution, that the ranking doesn't matter very much. Isn't that right?
Well, I'm not too sure, but probably that's true. Eh, of course, individual work is important, and of course, it is very important for promotion and for hiring anthropologists. The evaluation is important, but somehow there's no systematic way to evaluate individual scholars. But I know that the national evaluation of all the national universities, that matters, and that's important.
Yeah. But Junji, that's a really interesting question because the evaluation is something that is on the one hand extraordinarily reductive. On the other hand, some sort of evaluation has to take place. How do you do it? Do you do it in this quantitative mechanistic way, or do you do it in a subjective way? That's a huge question. And all of the different societies we come from are trying to answer this in different ways, it seems.
Yes. Of course, and that takes a lot of research, how it is. How it is done, of course it's difficult, but somehow I know that evaluation is given. Somehow it's being done, and I cannot summarize what happening is going on.
Well, I mean, I guess, Junji, we could, sorry, Diana, you're going to be next because I see your picture and you've been waiting a long time. But just to quickly answer, Junji, I mean, in Japan, up until recently, it was all done by seniority. Ignore publication. Anybody who's hired can stay forever until they retire. So is that an ideal? I don't think so, but still.
No, I don't think so. I don't think now a lot of peer evaluation, peer evaluation is so important, and seniority is not important now.
Yeah, it's changing very clearly. It's fitting the global standard. Yeah. Now, I thought we were going to end at 11:30. I'm sorry, we're going a little bit longer than we needed to, than we should have. But I think we'll stop in another 10 to 15 minutes. I want to let the last people talk. Everybody here should be able to talk if they have anything to say. And I don't see Francesca's face and Virginia's face. So Diana, you're next. Speak up.
Hello from the Catalan Association in Spain. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can indeed.
Yeah, okay, great. So I will be brief. We run a journal, Quaderns, that is open access, published in Catalan, Spanish, French, and English. And currently we are having a debate in the association about what to do with the journal. And it has to do with all these things that have been talked. The journal used to be ranked in national ranks, but not now. Basically because we lack the capacity to run sort of more logistical issues, because the journal is just run by voluntaries. And many of these people are in precarious job situations. So we have a lot of rotation that I think that Ricardo from Mexico also mentioned that. And that's a huge issue for us. So how this relates to the publishing panorama in Spain. So we have here a bunch of publications which are, some of them rank in national ranks and very few or none in international ranks. To get promotion, to get a job, so far you need to publish in internationally ranked journals. We hope things are changing with the introduction of DORA and other qualitative measures to evaluate who gets a job or who gets promotion, and also getting more importance to the fact of publishing open access. But still, publishing in English in internationally ranking publication is preferred. So we found this situation where young scholars need to publish on English and in internationally ranked, but at the same time, we want to keep publishing in Catalan and to have this local dialogue of things that can be interesting at the local level. But at the association, we have no idea how to proceed or how to do with the journal that has more than 20 years. And right now, we don't really know what to do. So we were very interested in participating in this conversation to get to know what people in other places are, the challenges you are facing and how you approach them. So I
Great,
wouldn't leave it
Diana.
there.
And you can probably see already that your situation is mimicked in societies, paralleled in societies around the world, which is why we're doing this. It's so fascinating. Now, before we move on to Francesca and Virginia, Michelle is leaving in about 5 minutes. So, Michelle, two things I'd like from you. First of all, send me the video of this before we put it up on YouTube so I can just look briefly. But then the other point is send me the names. Take a screenshot now if you haven't done it already, because I don't want to bother the whole group with this. You guys should all get a summary of what we're talking about here. And what I'm going to do before we all stop here is I don't think I'll need to read out these lists because we're already over time, but I certainly will come up very soon with a list of 20 or 25 different points we've made here. And I want all of you to add to them, because the ultimate aim of this is some list of what WCA can offer as possible solutions to this problem. And this is a problem of evaluation. What can we do? And let's do this collectively. I think we can come up with some and agree mostly anyway on these. Let me see. Francesca, you've been waiting a long time, and I apologize for making you wait so long. Are you there? Speak up, please.
Yes, I'm here. Let me just add some points to what Dorothy was also mentioning. In our system in Italy, now I'm talking about Italy, there is an issue concerning multidisciplinarity, and the issue that many anthropological works can have to go in multidisciplinary journals. Like, let me make some example: Journal of Refugee Studies, or the Journal des Socialistes or des Africanistes, or and finally another case, it could be Slavery and Abolition. That's about slavery, but in which you can have a lot of anthropology. And in our system, it's a little complicated to have this kind of journal included as in a ranking. I don't know about you guys. Concerning the language, Italian and other languages and English, we had a little bit of a different problem, because for a long time, it was preferred that people published in Italian rather than in other languages. So the system is changing now. But of course, if you are an anthropologist, you want to be discussed by a wider audience. So you might want to publish in other languages, but you were not ranked at the time very well if you were if you were publishing in other languages. Now the thing is changing, but sometimes the journals that are in other languages are, fairly inaccessible ones. Let's say American Anthropologist has such a high percentage of return, like 95%. So who is really getting into American Anthropologist as compared to another journal in Italian, which might be much easier? So, I mean, the issue is still, what do you go for if you want a career? And the other thing I see in the system is that a list of special journals or ranked, which doesn't include all the journals possible. Like in Brazil, I've seen that there is a very complete list, but it doesn't in Italy. So that sometimes having to publish in certain journals, it's also going a little bit against freedom of speech, because, I mean, if you can't publish in certain journals, certain things don't go in certain others, and so some of the things you cannot say, so you spend all your time just trying to publish in the right journals, and when you want to really say certain things, you can't do it. Other issues with the peer evaluation, I think it gets a little problematic, because, I mean, there is no longer people that have time to do peer evaluation. So, I mean, okay, people does peer evaluation, but it really takes a long time. And so, I mean, there are also issues. I have a friend in which she has been said in peer review that she has to see articles that she wrote several years ago, and she has to include it. So the peer evaluation sometimes gets some sort of problems. The system, anyway, this ranking system of the journals is very convoluted at the moment, but some of the journals have been included, some not. The problem with the Anglophone issue is that, of course, if you want an audience, this is the problem with the countries with languages, not minority languages like Gaelic, but with languages that people don't know, which can be Italian. in certain way French, even if it's not by many more people, but it could be even German or, you know, Hungarian. I don't know. Other languages is that exactly you want to write in your language, but you may want to also have to write in languages that. Yeah, and the last, and we have very few in this list journals in Spanish and in Portuguese, which I've tried to include it when working in these commissions. But anyway.
Yeah, you raise a bunch of good points, Francesca, and a couple of them that are key is we haven't talked about peer evaluation much so far, but that is a central issue, both because it takes a lot of labor of people and also because in the Anglo-American core, there's a certain kind of peer reviewing that, as I think Carmen was referring to earlier, may keep people out who aren't from that core. Both the editorial boards and the people who evaluate journals, who often evaluate articles, who often are from that core and from the editorial board. So that's quite key here. You also mentioned audience. And that's a key factor. Who do you write for? What audience do you write for? And that's central in the issue of whether to write locally or write internationally. In Hong Kong, we face that problem directly because if you write something locally readable, then it has to be in Cantonese, but you're encouraged to write in English, but who cares halfway around the world what goes on in Hong Kong? So that's a big deal. We'll need to talk about that more, I think. Yeah. Now, Virginia, you've had your hand up. Virginia, and then any last comments, and then I'll go over my final notes in about 30 seconds, and then we can stop here. But Virginia, go ahead.
Yeah, quickly. This follows nicely on something that Francesca said. The irony of a lot of what people experience in the world is that the main U.S. journals really publish very few international authors. I knew that when I was editor of American Ethnologist, and I tried, but you know, I published a whole lot when I was associate editor of American Anthropology for World Anthropologies, but that was a special section. And Mike Chipnick, who was editor about 10 years ago of the American Anthropologist, actually counted things. And what he said was a relatively small percentage of the articles actually published in American Anthropologist were by people outside the US. And of those, the vast majority were from Central and Western Europe. And that's a really big problem because, you know, if people around the world basically get pressured to publish in English and certainly in US journals, and they send them in, but they don't get published. We don't even know how many people there are who are submitting manuscripts to US journals, since they're mostly being rejected.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge problem. I think Gustavo Lins Ribeiro once talked about America as a land of what? Cosmopolitan provincialism or metropolitan provincialism, meaning that it's the hegemon and it thinks it's very global, but it's not in that sense. We very clearly see that, no doubt about it. And that would be something that I think WCAA needs to work towards to the extent we can, because many American journal editors would say, hey, if something is written in bad English, why should I publish it? So there is that native speaker bias that's deeply unfortunate, but we see that. Yeah. Okay, now, Ricardo, you got your hand up. Speak up.
No, it's gonna be, thank you. It's gonna be very quickly, because I've been listening and paying attention to everyone. But as Carmen Rial said, you know, like first we need to define certain things. For example, open access doesn't mean that it's a poor publication. Open access means that everyone can read it and there's different levels. That's one. And also it's indexed in the directory of open access journals. Now, the other thing that we need to understand is how indexing works. No, because a lot of people say like Google Scholar is not magic. It works under certain specific criteria, and some of that criteria is not followed by a lot of journals. That's why indexing is so important. Now, we also are talking about identifiers, digital. DOI or DOI is not the only one that exists there. No, it's the most standardized at this point, and it's very easy because it has a lot of metadata. But a lot of journals doesn't give the metadata to make the relationships of the citation. Now, for example, if you have an article and you put a lot of your references, a lot of journals doesn't add those references to their DOI. So actually, we don't know what they're citing. And that's a lot of what I've been seeing, for example, in the Global South, especially in Latin America. So we need to define those kind of things before, launching a big, saying like, oh, indexing is so bad. No, wait. No, indexing is just a criteria of saying like, if we divide 2 between 2, no, it is the same as dividing 10 between 10. So indexing works that way. But what we need to know is how much we're citing each other.
Yeah.
So that's the first issue. And well, that's one of the definitions. And the other one is that even if we have, for example, Brazil is one of the great examples. Carmen said, like, there was a huge boom of open access journals. Yet technically, their whole platform is there because they use a lot of money, and also because they were indexing via digital identifiers. So that makes things very easily. I don't know if they're making the citation, but at least they're doing at least half the road. A lot of other journals are not doing even that. They say like, well, this is on the internet and that's it. And that's not enough. No, so you need, because Google Scholar, for example, that I personally like, make things very visible, but you need to work the system to make things work. And I'm just gonna end up with an example that I've been working with, and I'm sad that my friend and colleague Fernando Salmerón is not here. The International Encyclopedia of Anthropology, a lot of you have worked and a lot of you have published there. So Fernando wrote the biography of Gonzalo Aguirre Beltrán, for example. And he makes all the references to all of Aguirre Beltrán, that he's a great anthropologist. Well, he died many years ago, and I think that it was Fernando's friend. Well, the thing is that all references in this international journal appear in a Japanese citation database. You see what's the problem there? We don't even have a reference in Google Scholar in Spanish of this Mexican author. So that's part of the fun. So if we don't tell the system what to look for, then I don't know what we're gonna do. And there's a way to tell the system of doing that to make things discoverable and visible. So I think that we need to work toward that first. Well, thank you.
Okay, now, Ricardo, you said something really important, that rather than directly criticize a citation index for its Anglo-American bias and so on, we need to understand how it particularly works. And often that can be difficult. SSCI, to me, is the best example, because the way to make more journals worldwide in SSCI is simply to have local scholars cite more of scholars from their own local journals rather than reach over into America all the time. So there are some solutions to this that don't only involve haranguing the bias of a citation index, although those definitely have biases. So it's a complex matter. Now,
just very quickly, so something that I missed, sorry, just one thing, that it's a side project that I have. So, for example, it is also about what are we teaching and what we make reference when we're teaching. That's the syllabus project. Emily can tell you about that much more deeper. But from my perspective from Mexico, because I asked for a big bulk of different syllabus or syllabi from different Mexican classes, is that you learn that they are making a lot of references to, Anglophone anthropology, and that they're not making reference to the very, new stuff done in Spanish. So it's also a problem there because we are repeating patterns that, need to be addressed. And I think that Emily can give us, well, probably in a different, some meeting, a lot of reference because she has a specific project about it. Well, that's the thing. Thank you.
Great. Let's put that in. And thank you, Emily. We're going to be dealing with that. Now, what I'm going to do from here on, I have 25 points that I've written down here that I've tried to summarize from a particular country to a more broad view. Michelle is sending me all the participants here, and so I will be emailing these to you within the next several days so that you can see these points. Get to work on them and write them. Now, these points, we don't want to make them greatly complex, but we do want to have a set of global guidelines for how people can look at how all of these different institutions can deal with this issue of evaluation and publication globally. That's what WCAA is supposed to do, and I'll need all of your help on this. So please be alert to when I send this and make any changes you want. I will send you only a beginning, and I may get a lot of stuff wrong, but we look forward to this. And we will eventually put this on the WCAA website and on the WOW website as WOW's recommendations for how publications should be evaluated. Okay. Okay, thank you all for your patience. It's been almost 2 hours, but very enlightening, and I really appreciate all these comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thanks to everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, Michelle is gone. Okay, well, have a good one, Francesca.
Ciao.
Ciao. Bye, PJ.